Imagine going back in time. In 2005, archaeologists made an amazing discovery at Tel Zayit in ancient Judah. They found a big limestone rock with very old writing on it. This writing was an early Hebrew alphabet. The Zayit stone is one of the oldest examples of the Hebrew alphabet. It helps us learn about the ancient Israelites and their writing. This script was used to write the first parts of the Bible. So, where did this Paleo-Hebrew writing come from? It grew out of Proto-Sinaitic, inspired by Egyptian hieroglyphs. This alphabet emerged in the Sinai Peninsula around the 19th century BCE. It evolved into Proto-Canaanite in the Late Bronze Age, used by groups like Israelites, Phoenicians and Moabites. By the 10th century BCE, it became Paleo-Hebrew, a special version for the Hebrew language with 22 consonant letters. Paleo-Hebrew became the main way of writing in ancient Israel and Judah. People used it for hundreds of years. They used it to write down their history, their laws, and what they believed about God. It became super important to their way of life. People called scribes were the main ones who did the writing. They were very good at it. Scribes worked for kings, in temples, and for rich people. They wrote important papers, kept records for the government, and copied holy writings. Finding alphabets written out, like on the Zayit stone, tells us there might have been schools or practice lessons for new scribes to learn. We find Paleo-Hebrew writing on different kinds of things like words carved in stone and on pieces of broken pottery called ostraca. Yes, people wrote on broken pots, and they probably used a paper-like material called papyrus for longer writings. They wrote all sorts of things in Paleo-Hebrew, like messages from kings, notes for running things, personal letters, special stamps called seals, and even parts of the Hebrew Bible. Lots of important Paleo-Hebrew writings have lasted through the years. These show us exactly how this old writing was used. One of the oldest is called the Giza calendar. It's a small stone tablet that was found in 1908 at a place called Tel Giza. It's from the late 10th century BCE, so it's really old. It lists the months of the year and tells what kind of farming work was done each month. The words are in a very old form of Hebrew. We're not sure exactly what the calendar was for. Maybe it was homework for a student, a rhyme to help remember something, words to a song, or even a list for paying taxes. The Giza calendar is one of the oldest Hebrew writings we have. It shows us that Paleo-Hebrew writing was used this early on, and it tells us a lot about farming in ancient Israel. As the Israelites' way of life grew, they started using Paleo-Hebrew more and more. They used it for big, important carvings on stone and also for everyday government jobs. One of the most famous big carvings is the Siloam inscription. It was found in 1880 in Jerusalem inside a tunnel called Hezekiah's Tunnel. This writing tells about when the tunnel was finished. It even describes how two groups of workers, digging from different ends, met in the middle. Another important carving is the royal steward inscription. It's found on a stone piece above the door of a tomb in Siloam near Jerusalem. This one is from the 7th century BCE. It says whose tomb it was, an important person who worked for the king. And it has a warning, like a curse for anyone who messes with the tomb. Remember those ostraca writings on broken pottery? They give us tons of information. For example, there are the Lachish letters. These were mostly messages for soldiers from the early 6th century BCE. And the Arad, ostraca, are about running the temple and keeping track of supplies. All this shows that Paleo-Hebrew was used for keeping records every day. Paleo-Hebrew wasn't alone. It was like part of a big family of ways to write. We call this family Canaanite or Northwest Semitic scripts. The most famous family member is probably the Phoenician alphabet. It was used by traders who sailed the seas from big cities like Tyre and Sidon. The Phoenician alphabet and Paleo-Hebrew were like close cousins. Both came from that Proto-Canaanite writing we talked about earlier. At first they looked almost exactly the same. You could often only tell them apart by the language that was written down. Both ways of writing had 22 letters, and these letters were for consonant sounds. They didn't really show vowel sounds, like R-A-E-I-O-U, and the letters were in the same order in both alphabets. But after a while, some small differences in style started to show up. This made Paleo Hebrew look special to the people of Israel or Judah. Other groups of people in Canaan, like the Moabites and Edomites, also had their own slightly different ways of writing. They were all part of this big Canaanite writing family. For hundreds of years, Paleo Hebrew was the main way people in Israel and Judah wrote everything. But then things started to change. Another way of writing, called Aramaic, became really popular. This meant people started using Paleo Hebrew less and less for everyday things. The Aramaic writing also came from those old Proto-Canaanite writings. At first it was used by people in kingdoms called Aramean kingdoms. But Aramaic got much more important when big empires, like the Assyrian Empire, started using it as their main government language. Then the Babylonians and the Persian Empire did too. Later, when many people from Judah were forced to live in Babylon, a time called the Babylonian exile, they saw and used Aramaic a lot. They started using the Aramaic language and its way of writing, even for writing Hebrew. You see, the Aramaic writing was more flowy, kind of like cursive handwriting, and it was easier to write quickly with a pen and ink. That's one big reason people started using it more. But Paleo Hebrew didn't disappear completely. It was still used for special things like holy writings. It was also put on coins made during the Hasmonean times. Using Paleo Hebrew on these things was a way to show they were independent and remembered their old traditions. Still, the Aramaic way of writing, which slowly changed into the square Hebrew letters many people recognize today, became the main one for most Jewish writing. So while Paleo Hebrew wasn't used much by Jewish people anymore for everyday things, it wasn't completely forgotten. It was kept alive by a group called the Samaritans. The Samaritans are an old group of people. They say their history goes all the way back to the northern kingdom of Israel. They kept the first 5 books of the Bible, which are called the Pentateuch, written in a style that came straight from Paleo Hebrew. The Samaritan way of writing changed a little over hundreds of years, but it still kept the main shapes and look of the old Paleo Hebrew script. Their version of the Pentateuch is very important for studying the Bible. It's a little different in some parts from the main Jewish version, which is called the Masoretic text. Using this special Samaritan writing is a big part of what makes them unique. It connects them to their ancient Israelite history. Interestingly, long ago, wise Jewish teachers, the rabbis who wrote the Talmud, actually talked about what the very first writing of the Torah looked like. They wondered if it was first written in Paleo Hebrew or in those square letters that came from Aramaic. This talk in the Talmud shows us that they thought about history and knew that ways of writing could change over time. So, as you can see, Paleo Hebrew is much more than just an old way of writing that nobody uses anymore. It's a super important key that helps us understand the old past. It gives us a real connection, something we can almost touch, to the world of ancient Israel and Judah. It shines a light on the history of the Hebrew language and how the Bible was written. For people who study the Bible, Paleo Hebrew is extremely important. It helps them understand the very first steps of how the Bible was written down. Guess what? Some of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls are even written in Paleo Hebrew. This shows it was still used for holy writings during the time of the Second Temple. And for archaeologists, those people who dig up old things, Paleo Hebrew writings can prove that old objects are real. They also give us real proof about how people in Israel and Judah lived. This ancient writing itself tells a story. It's a story about reading, writing, and how people shared ideas in the ancient world. It shows how writing helped a whole group of people know who they were. we can still feel the importance of Paleo Hebrew today. It stands for ancient history and makes us feel connected to a time long, long ago. It really shows how powerful writing is. It can keep memories, culture, and faith alive for thousands and thousands of years. Paleo Hebrew helps us learn about a very important time in human history, a time that really shaped the world we live in today.